On a quiet evening in the suburbs of Albuquerque, mechanic Jose was finishing up his work when he heard the roar of an airplane landing right behind his workshop. A stranger in an expensive suit stepped out of the cockpit and called him by name. "Are you the one who repaired my nephew's wheelchair?" he asked, holding a briefcase in his hands. Jose froze. His good deed had turned into something much bigger than he could have imagined. José García lived in a dusty suburb of Albuquerque, New Mexico, where the sun scorched everything in sight and the asphalt on the roads had long since cracked from the heat and time. He was 35 years old, and his hands, covered with calluses and traces of machine oil, told the story of a man who had worked with iron all his life. His face was weather-beaten, with a light stubble, and his eyes were dark, kind, but tired, as if they had seen too much. He ran a small workshop on the outskirts of town, an old hangar with iron gates that creaked every time they were opened. Inside, it smelled of gasoline, rust, and metal, and the shelves were lined with tools collected over the years, old wrenches, screwdrivers with worn handles, cans of bolts and nuts. This was his little kingdom, where he repaired pickup trucks, motorcycles, and anything else the locals brought him. Jose's life was uneventful, almost boring. Customers didn't come often, mostly asking him to fix old Fords or Chevrolets that were long overdue for the scrap heap. They paid him little, some with small change, some with promises to pay later, and some with food, a jar of homemade sauce or a piece of barbecue meat. Jose didn't complain. He was used to this life, to this neighborhood, where the houses were low, with peeling paint, and the people lived modestly, counting every dollar. His apartment nearby, small, with faded wallpaper and a creaky bed, was as simple as he was. In the evenings, he would come home, turn on an old lamp, open a bottle of beer, and look out the window at the deserted landscape, where the wind blew dust and dry bushes. One day, at the end of a hot day, when the sun was setting, flooding the sky with orange and red streaks, there was a knock on the workshop door. The knock was faint, uncertain, as if the person standing behind the gate was afraid to disturb him. Jose was just finishing tinkering with the rusty carburetor of an old Dodge. His hands were black with dirt, and beads of sweat glistened on his forehead. He put down his tools, took a rag soaked in the smell of gasoline, wiped his palms, and went to open the door. The iron gate creaked, and a hot wind blew in his face, bringing with it dust and the smell of dry earth. Standing in front of him was a woman, short, with a tired face and dark circles under her eyes. Her name was Maria Lopez, and she looked as if she was carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders. Next to her, in an old wheelchair, sat a boy of about 10. His name was Luis. He was thin, with pale skin and dark hair that stuck out from under a worn baseball cap. The wheelchair looked like it had been found in a junkyard. The paint was peeling, revealing patches of rust. The wheels squeaked even when stationary, and the metal frame seemed fragile, as if it could fall apart with the slightest push. Luis looked away, his head bowed as if he wanted to hide from prying eyes. His thin fingers nervously fiddled with the edge of an old jacket that was too big for him. The sleeves hung down, covering his hands. Maria held a worn backpack with a stack of papers sticking out of it and looked at Jose with concern. "Hello," she said quietly, almost in a whisper, fingering the strap of her backpack. Her voice trembled with excitement. "Are you Jose? I was told you can fix anything. Luis's stroller. It's completely broken. Would you please take a look?" She hesitated, glancing quickly at her son, and added, "I don't have much money, only $50. I just paid the rent, but if you need more, I'll find it, somehow." Her words sounded confused, as if she was afraid Jose would refuse. Jose looked over at Luis. The boy wasn't looking at him. His eyes were fixed on the ground, on the cracks in the asphalt covered with dust and small stones. It was clear that he felt uncomfortable here, that the creaky wheelchair, which loudly announced his every movement, made him feel like a stranger among the other children. Jose noticed how Luis pressed his lips together, as if holding back tears, and this childlike vulnerability touched him more deeply than he had expected. "Let's take a look," he said, trying to sound gentle, and crouched down in front of the wheelchair. He touched the wheel lightly, and it responded with a shrill squeak, as sharp as the sound of an old gramophone. Jose grimaced, imagining how it must be for Luis to hear that every day. "How old is she?" he asked, looking at Maria. She sighed, and there was a note of sadness in her voice. 7, I think. We got her after Luis's operation. His legs gave out then. She was already old. Someone took pity on us, I guess. We were happy to have her, Sony, but now she's barely hanging on. The wheels hardly turn, and the frame is wobbly. I tried to fix it myself, but what can I do? She waved her hand, and the gesture was full of helplessness. José nodded, understanding without words. He had seen people like her before, those who struggled with their last ounce of strength but never gave up. Maria looked as if she had long forgotten what rest was. Her hands, rough from work, trembled as she reached into her backpack and pulled out her wallet, old, worn, with a broken zipper. Opening it, she showed him a few crumpled bills and a handful of change. "I only have $50 right now," she said, looking at José pleadingly. "I'll get paid next week. I'll bring more. Whatever you can. Just do what you can, at least so Luis can get to school. It's hard for him there. You know, the kids tease him sometimes, and he just keeps quiet, puts up with it." Her voice broke, and she turned away, hiding her tears. José felt a lump in his throat. He imagined Luis, small and alone, rolling down the bumpy road in that wreck of a car, his classmates laughing behind him. He imagined Maria, lying awake at night, wondering how she would make ends meet. "Leave it," he said, rising from his crouch. His voice was quiet but firm. "You can take it tomorrow." Maria froze, not understanding. "How much will it cost?" she repeated, still holding the wallet. "I can borrow from the neighbors if you want." "No, don't worry about it," he interrupted, looking away so as not to meet her eyes. "I'll do it for free." For a moment, silence hung in the workshop. Even the wind seemed to die down. Maria slowly lowered her hands, and the wallet fell back into her backpack. Her lips trembled, and tears glistened in her eyes, not from grief, but from relief. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice breaking. "You have no idea what this means. Luis is at home almost all the time. He's ashamed. And I don't know how to help him." She fell silent, covering her mouth with her hand to keep from crying. Luis finally raised his head and looked at José. There was surprise and a faint spark of hope in his eyes. José nodded and waved awkwardly. "Go on, come back tomorrow." Maria wiped her tears with her sleeve, smiled a weak but sincere smile, and took hold of the wheelchair handles. They left, moving slowly along the dirt road, and José watched them until their silhouettes disappeared into the twilight. He returned to the workshop, closed the gate, and stood for a long time, staring at the empty space where the wheelchair had been. His chest felt heavy and warm at the same time. He decided that he would do more for Luis than just repair his wheelchair. That night, when he returned home, José couldn't sleep. He turned on the old radio, which played a quiet melody, and thought about Luis and Maria. But when he went to bed, he found a note under the door, written in rough handwriting. "Mind your own business." His heart pounded. Someone knew what he had done. Someone was watching. José clenched the note in his fist and stared into the darkness outside the window. This wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. The next morning, José García woke up early. The sun had barely risen above the horizon, bathing the suburbs of Albuquerque in a pale golden light. The wind blew dust across the deserted streets, and somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. José lay on his old bed, staring at the cracked ceiling of his small apartment. The note he had found under his door last night still lay on the table, crumpled and ominous. "Mind your own business." He had spent most of the night tossing and turning, thinking of possible enemies. Who could have written it? And why had his good deed provoked such a reaction? But there was no time to think. He had promised Maria and Luis he would return the wheelchair by morning. José got up, pulled on his worn denim jacket, and headed for the workshop. The streets were empty, only dry bushes rustling in the wind. When he approached the hangar, his heart skipped a beat. The lock on the iron gate was intact, but a shard of glass lay nearby, and tire tracks were visible on the ground. Someone had been here during the night. He threw open the gate, and the smell of gasoline hit his nose. Luis's cart was standing where he had left it, rusty, battered, but waiting for his hands. José decided not to think about the note. "Just do your job," he muttered under his breath and set to work. He rolled the stroller inside and began to examine it. The longer he looked, the more he realized that there was almost nothing to repair. It would be easier to throw it away. The bearings and the wheels were worn down to the limit. One was completely stuck. The frame was wobbly, as if it had been hastily patched up, and the fasteners were loose, threatening to fall off. The wheelchair was heavy, uncomfortable, clearly not for a child, more likely for an adult who had long since passed away. José sighed, rubbing his forehead. He had a box of junk, old bolts, pieces of metal, spare parts from dismantled cars. Maybe something would work. He knew there was no point in repairing such junk. A new one would be cheaper. But Maria had no choice, and Luis shouldn't be stuck inside because of it. Turning on the old radio hanging on the wall, Jose tuned it to a station playing soft guitar music. He sat down next to the wheelchair and began to take it apart, unscrewing the rusty bolts. Every creak and rattle told him that this thing had been crying out for help for a long time. He replaced the bearings, carving them out of old parts he found in the corner of the workshop. The metal hissed under the welding torch, sparks flew in all directions, and Jose squinted at the bright light, carefully following the seam. Then he tightened all the bolts and lubricated the wheels so they would roll smoothly and silently. But that didn't seem enough to him. The wheelchair looked dreary, gray and shabby, like an old shed. Jose remembered how Luis was ashamed to look at it and decided that the boy needed not just a working tool, but something he could be proud of. In the corner of the workshop stood a can of paint, bright red, leftovers from painting someone's old Chevrolet. Jose took a brush and set to work. The red color went on unevenly, but with each stroke, the wheelchair came to life. He added a couple of white stripes to the back, just for fun. When he finished, it was already past midnight. Fatigue weighed heavily on his shoulders, his back ached, but inside he felt warm. He turned off the light, closed the gate, and went home, anticipating how Luis would react to the result. In the morning, Maria and Luis came to the workshop. Jose rolled the wheelchair out onto the street, and the boy froze. His eyes, usually downcast, suddenly lit up. The wheelchair gleamed with red paint, the wheels rolled silently, and the frame no longer wobbled. Luis cautiously approached, touched the handles, and ran his finger along the white stripe. "Is this mine?" he asked quietly, almost incredulously. "It's yours," smiled Jose, feeling the corners of his mouth turn up for the first time in a long time. Luis sat down in the wheelchair and circled the yard. For the first time in months, he didn't hear the squeaking, didn't feel the wheels gripping the ground. He laughed, a clear, childlike laugh, and that sound was better than any reward for Jose. Maria stood nearby, her hands pressed against her chest. Her eyes were shiny with tears, but she was smiling. "How can we thank you?" she said. "You have no idea what this means to us." "Come on," Jose said, looking away, embarrassed. "It's nothing." But for Maria and Luis, it wasn't a small thing. They left, and Jose watched them for a long time until the red stroller disappeared around the corner. He returned to the workshop, feeling lighthearted. But the joy did not last long. At dawn the next day, he discovered that the workshop window had been broken. Glass crunched under his feet, and a new note lay on the floor. "This is a warning." Jose clenched his fists, his heart pounding. He remembered Tom Craig, a local businessman who had been terrorizing the neighborhood for the past few months. Tom had been buying up land, forcing people to sell their homes for next to nothing. Rumors were circulating that he was setting fire to barns and breaking down the fences of those who resisted. Jose had seen him a couple of times, a tall man in an expensive suit, with cold eyes and a smile that sent a chill down his spine. But why would Tom threaten him over a wheelchair? It didn't make sense. In the evening, as he was closing his workshop, Jose noticed a shadow near Maria's house. Someone was standing in the alley, holding a phone or a camera. The light from a street lamp flashed on the lens. The stranger was photographing Luis riding his new wheelchair. Jose took a step forward, but the shadow disappeared into the darkness. He felt a chill run down his spine. This was not just a warning. He was being watched. He returned home, locked all the doors, and stared out the window for a long time, clutching the crumpled note in his hand. Something was brewing, and he knew it had something to do with what he had done. The next day, Jose decided to check out the rumors. He went to the local bar where the drivers and workers gathered. Juan, an old friend who always knew more than he said, was standing at the bar. Jose ordered a coffee and asked quietly, "Have you heard anything about Tom Craig?" Juan frowned, looked around, and leaned closer. "Tom started a big construction project. He wants to tear down the whole neighborhood to build a shopping center. They say he's bribed half the city council and is threatening those who won't sell their homes. Stay away from him, Jose. He's got a long reach." Jose nodded, feeling anger boiling inside him. He remembered Maria and Luis. Their house was in the same neighborhood. The wheelchair he had repaired could become a symbol of resistance for Tom. That night, Jose didn't sleep. He sat at the table, looking at the red stroller through his memories. The threats, the surveillance, the broken window, it was all links in the same chain. The first twist of fate had caught up with him. His good deed, which seemed trivial, had collided with someone's evil will. He didn't know what to do next, but one thing was clear. He wasn't going to give up. In the morning, he decided to talk to Maria. Perhaps she knew more than she was saying. Or maybe she was in danger too. The morning in Albuquerque began with heavy skies, gray clouds hung low, promising rain, which was rare for this area. José García stood outside his workshop, staring at the broken window and the shards of glass crunching under his feet. The note with the words, "This is a warning," was still in his jeans pocket, a reminder that trouble was close. He felt anger and anxiety mixing inside him, but he couldn't let fear take over. Luis's wheelchair, bright red and shiny, had become more than just a job to him. It was a challenge, not just to Tom Craig, but to all the injustice that was suffocating the neighborhood. José decided to take action. He walked several blocks to María López's house, a small, one-story building with cracked plaster and a crooked fence. María herself opened the door, her face pale and dark circles under her eyes. She looked as if she hadn't slept all night. "José? Is something wrong?" she asked, fingering the edge of an old sweater. Luis was sitting in the room, rolling around in his wheelchair, smiling for the first time in a long time as he rolled a small ball across the floor. José pulled María aside so the boy couldn't hear. "Someone's watching you," he said quietly, showing her the crumpled note. "And me too. Is it something to do with the wheelchair?" María turned even paler. Her hands trembled and she sank into a chair by the door. "I didn't want to get you involved," she whispered. "It's Tom Craig. He wants our house. He says he's going to build a shopping center here. I refused to sell, and he started threatening me. First letters, then phone calls. And now, you're in danger because of us." José clenched his fists. He remembered Juan's words in the bar. He has long arms. So Luis's wheelchair, which had become a symbol of life and hope, had angered Tom. The boy rolling around the yard had inspired the neighbors not to give up, and that was ruining the businessman's plans. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" José asked, trying to keep his voice steady. María lowered her head. "I was afraid. He said that if I complained to anyone, it would be worse. Luis is all I have. I can't lose him." Her voice broke, and she covered her face with her hands. José felt determination boiling inside him. He couldn't leave them alone. "I'll take care of it," he said firmly. "But I need to know everything." María nodded and took a stack of letters from the desk drawer. Threats, written in rough handwriting, demanding that she sell the house for pennies. One of them ended with the words, "Your son will be sorry." José returned to the workshop with the letters in his pocket. He sat down at his workbench, turned on the radio, a quiet melody about the road and the wind played, and began to think. Tom Craig wasn't just a greedy businessman. He was a predator who used fear and bribery to destroy lives. José remembered seeing his car, a black Cadillac with tinted windows, outside City Hall. The rumors about corrupt officials now seemed true. But how could he prove it? He needed a plan. That evening, he went to Juan's bar. The bar was noisy. Workers were drinking beer and discussing the weather and work. José ordered a coffee and leaned toward Juan. "I need proof against Tom," he said quietly. Juan frowned. "Are you crazy? He'll crush you like a bug." But José didn't back down. "He's threatening María and Luis. I can't just sit here and do nothing." Juan sighed, looked around, and pulled an old phone from under the bar. There was a guy here, Tom's driver. He was fired a month ago. He knows something, but he's afraid to talk. Find him. His name is Raúl. José spent the next day searching. Raúl lived in a trailer on the outskirts of town, surrounded by rusty cars and dry bushes. He was a short man with a nervous look and a cigarette in his hand. At first, he slammed the door in José's face, but José didn't leave. "I'm not with Tom," he said through the crack. "My name is José. He's threatening a child. Help me." Raúl paused, then opened the door. "I don't know much," he muttered, taking a drag on his cigarette. "But I have recordings. Tom called someone at City Hall and promised money for some documents. I accidentally recorded it when I was driving him around." He handed José the flash drive. "Just don't tell him where you got this. If Tom finds out, I'm finished." José returned home and turned on an old laptop that had been gathering dust in the corner. The recording was short but clear. Tom's voice, cold and confident, promising $50,000 for fake demolition permits for the neighborhood. José felt the blood rush to his temples. This was it, the proof. But his joy turned to horror when he heard a noise outside the window. He looked out and saw a black Cadillac parked outside the workshop, its headlights off. The door opened and a hooded man got out. Metal flashed in his hands, not a knife, but a lighter. A minute later, the workshop was engulfed in flames. José ran out into the street, but it was too late. The fire was consuming his hangar, tools, spare parts, everything he had saved over the years was turning to ash. He stood there, clutching the flash drive in his fist, watching the flames light up the night. The Cadillac disappeared into the darkness. Jose lost everything except his belief in justice. He remembered Luis, his smile, the red stroller rolling across the yard. The boy had become a legend among the neighbors. Children would come up to him and ask where such beauty came from, and he would proudly reply, "Uncle Jose made it." This inspired people not to sell their homes, to hold on. And Tom noticed. The next morning, Jose came to the ruins of his workshop. Smoke was still rising from the coals, and the smell of burning hung in the air. Neighbors gathered around, whispering and shaking their heads. Someone said, "It was Tom." Everyone knows. Jose nodded but said nothing. In his pocket was a flash drive, his only weapon. He had lost his workshop, but not his hope. The unexpected discovery, Raul's notes, gave him a chance. Now he knew what to do. He needed to find allies, people who weren't afraid of Tom. He remembered Emily Ramirez, a journalist from the local newspaper who wrote about corruption. She could help. Jose stood among the ashes, feeling his determination grow. The conflict with Tom had become personal. It wasn't just a fight for Maria's wheelchair or her home. It was a war for the entire neighborhood, for the right to live without fear. He took one last look at the smoldering ruins and moved forward. The tension was mounting, but there was nowhere to retreat. The day after the fire in Albuquerque was cold and windy. Ash from José Garcia's burned-out workshop still swirled in the air, settling on the cracked asphalt. José stood among the ruins, clutching the flash drive with Tom Craig's recording in his pocket. His hands were shaking, not from the cold, but from anger and exhaustion. He had lost everything. His tools, his savings, the place where he had spent the last 10 years of his life. But a spark of determination burned in his chest. He couldn't let Tom win, not now, when the lives of Maria, Luis, and the entire neighborhood were at stake. Jose knew he couldn't do it alone. He needed someone who could bring the truth to light. He remembered Emily Ramirez, a reporter for the local newspaper, the Albuquerque Tribune. She was short, with a sharp gaze and a reputation for not being afraid to stir up trouble. Jose had seen her articles about corruption in City Hall and land fraud. If anyone could help, it was her. He found her in a small office on the outskirts of town, littered with papers and coffee cups. Emily was sitting at her laptop, typing at such a speed that it seemed as if her life depended on it. "Are you Jose Garcia?" she asked, without looking up from the screen when he entered. Jose nodded, feeling confused. "I heard about your workshop. That's a shame. I hear Tom Craig had a hand in it." Her voice was even, but there was genuine anger in it. Jose took out the flash drive and placed it on the table. "Here's the proof. He bribed officials to tear down the neighborhood. And he's threatening people. I want him to answer for it." Emily finally looked up, her eyes lighting up with interest. She took the flash drive, plugged it into her laptop, and listened to the recording. "This is gold," she said, smiling for the first time since they had met. "But one recording isn't enough. We need documents, witnesses. Are you willing to take the risk?" Jose nodded. He understood that he was risking not only himself, but also Maria and Luis. But there was no turning back. Emily proposed a plan. She would start digging at City Hall using her connections, while Jose would talk to the neighbors and gather their stories. "If we can prove that Tom was blackmailing people, the court won't save him," she said. Jose returned to the neighborhood and began going door to door. At first, people were silent, paralyzed by fear of Tom. But when he showed them Luis's red wheelchair rolling through the yard, something changed. "Did you do that?" asked an old man named Miguel, who lived across the street from Maria. "My grandson plays with Luis now. Tom wants to kick us out, but we won't give up." One by one, the neighbors began to speak. Threats, arson, late-night phone calls. Jose recorded everything on an old tape recorder Emily had given him. A few days later, Emily called. "I found the fake demolition documents. Someone at City Hall sold Tom the permits for pennies. The name is John Carter, the mayor's assistant. We have a chance." Jose felt hope springing up inside him. He and Emily put together a dossier, Raul's recording, the neighbors' statements, copies of the documents. But Tom wasn't going to give up. The next evening, Jose noticed a black Cadillac outside his house. The door opened and a man in a hoodie got out, the same man who had set fire to the workshop. He left an envelope under the door. Inside was a photo of Luis in his wheelchair and a note. "Get out, or the boy will suffer." Jose clenched his fists so tightly that his knuckles turned white. That was the last straw. He gathered his neighbors in a vacant lot a block away. More than 20 people showed up, men, women, even children. Luis sat in his red wheelchair at the front, looking at Jose with childlike faith. "Tom wants to break us," Jose said, his voice trembling with tension. But we can stop him. Tomorrow we'll go to City Hall. Peacefully, with evidence. Let them know we're not afraid. People nodded. Someone shouted, for Luis. Jose looked at the boy, and he smiled, widely, purely, as if he knew he had become a symbol of their struggle. The next morning, they stood in front of City Hall, a small crowd with signs reading Tom Craig is a thief and save our neighborhood. Luis's red wheelchair gleamed in the sun, attracting the attention of passers-by. Emily filmed everything, promising to publish a report. The police approached but did not intervene. The protest was peaceful. Jose handed the file to an officer, asking him to send it to the court. The tension grew. Tom could strike at any moment. Then a rumble sounded above the crowd. Everyone looked up. A small private plane was circling over the square, descending toward the field behind City Hall. The plane landed, kicking up a cloud of dust. A man in a formal suit stepped out of the cockpit, tall, with dark hair and a restrained smile. He was followed by an assistant carrying a leather briefcase. The crowd froze. The man approached Jose and held out his hand. José García? I'm Juan Lopez, Maria's brother. Jose blinked, trying to understand. You're the mechanic who fixed Luis's wheelchair, Juan continued. I'm a lawyer from Dallas. Luis wrote to me about you, and I flew here. Maria, who was standing nearby, gasped and rushed to her brother, hugging him. You came? She whispered, tears streaming down her cheeks. Juan turned to the crowd. Tom blackmailed my family, he said loudly. He threatened Maria to sell the house. I didn't know how hard it was for her until Luis wrote to me. I'm here to help. The second twist of fate struck like lightning. Juan took a stack of documents out of his briefcase. I have proof of his dealings. I'm taking this case to court. The crowd buzzed. Someone shouted with joy. Jose looked at Juan, feeling the tension give way to hope. This wasn't just a protest, it was a team. But Tom wasn't sleeping. While Juan was talking, a black Cadillac pulled up to the square. Two men in dark jackets with menacing faces got out. They moved toward the crowd, but the police, noticing them, intervened. Identify yourselves, shouted an officer. One of them glanced at Tom, who was sitting in the car, and tried to run away, but he was caught. Jose realized that Tom was losing control. Juan put his hand on his shoulder. We will win, Jose. Legally. Emily filmed every moment, her camera capturing faces, posters, and the red wheelchair. The day was drawing to a close. Jose watched as Juan and Maria hugged Luis, as neighbors patted each other on the shoulders. The fight for justice was gaining momentum, but the trial was ahead, the final battle. Jose felt that this was not the end, but the beginning of something bigger. The evening after the protest in Albuquerque was quiet but tense. The sky was overcast, and the first drops of rain fell on the dusty asphalt, washing away the traces of the day. José García stood outside Maria Lopez's house, watching Luis's red wheelchair glisten under the streetlight. Inside the house, it was warm. The voices of Maria and Juan, her brother, drifted out through the open window, mingling with Luis's laughter. Jose clutched the flash drive with Tom Craig's recording in his pocket, a small object that had been the beginning of the end for the man who had held the neighborhood in fear. Behind him was the protest, ahead of him was the trial. But even now, he could feel that victory was close. Juan Lopez, a lawyer from Dallas, wasted no time. The morning after the protest, he gathered all the evidence, Raul's recording, the fake documents from Emily Ramirez, the statements from the neighbors that Jose had collected. His assistant, a quiet guy in a strict suit, carried a briefcase with papers that could crush Tom in court. Emily published a report in the Albuquerque Tribune. The headline, Mechanic versus Magnate, spread throughout the city. The article told the story of Jose, Luis's wheelchair, and how a small act inspired people to fight back. A photo of the red wheelchair in front of City Hall became a symbol of hope. People called the newspaper to share their stories of Tom's extortion. A wave rose. The trial was scheduled for a week later. The courtroom was packed. Jose's neighbors sat in the back rows. Maria and Luis took seats in the front. One spoke confidently, his voice ringing like steel. He showed the recordings where Tom promised money to the mayor's assistant, John Carter, presented the fake demolition permits, and read the threatening letters Maria had kept in her desk drawer. Tom Craig sat opposite him in an expensive suit, but his cold eyes now looked confused. His lawyer tried to object, but the evidence was ironclad. The judge, an elderly woman with a stern face, listened silently, her pen gliding across her notepad. Jose sat next to Maria, feeling his heart pound. He wasn't used to places like this, a courtroom that smelled of wood and paper, where every word carried more weight than his tools. Luis held his hand, his little fingers clenching his palm. "Uncle Jose, are we going to win?" he asked quietly. Jose smiled, feeling warmth in his chest for the first time in a week. "We're going to win, Luis. I promise." The boy nodded, looking at his red wheelchair parked against the wall of the courtroom. It was there, a silent witness to their struggle. The denouement came quickly. The judge handed down his verdict. Tom Craig was found guilty of bribery, blackmail, and arson. His building permits were revoked, and the deal with the shopping center fell through. John Carter was arrested right in the courtroom. He tried to slip out, but the police caught him at the exit. Tom sat motionless, his face pale, the smirk gone. Neighbors applauded. Someone shouted, "For Luis." One shook Jose's hand, his eyes shining. "You started this," he said. "I just finished it." Jose shook his head. "We all did." After the trial, one approached Jose with an offer. "Your workshop burned down, but I can help. Here's a grant, $100,000. Build a new one, better than the old one. You deserve it." He handed Jose a check, then turned to Luis. "And for you, hero, here's this." A box appeared from the assistant's briefcase, a new wheelchair, lightweight, with smooth wheels and a blue frame. Luis gasped, his eyes lighting up. "And there's more," one added, taking out a phone with a bright screen. "Now you'll write to me more often." Maria hugged her brother, tears streaming down her cheeks. "You've come back to us," she whispered. That evening, Jose stood outside Maria's house, watching Luis ride his new wheelchair. The red wheelchair remained in the yard, a reminder of how it all began. Neighbors gathered around, laughing and sharing homemade tortillas and beer. Miguel, an old man from the next street, patted Jose on the shoulder. "You gave us a voice, kid. Tom thought we were weak, but we showed him." Jose nodded, feeling the fatigue recede. He wasn't looking for revenge. He had achieved justice, and that was the best he could do. A month later, Jose's new workshop opened in the same place. The hangar was bigger, with new tools gleaming on the shelves. Juan paid for advertising, and customers flocked to Jose not only from Albuquerque but also from neighboring towns. He repaired cars, but now he was known as a man who wasn't afraid to stand up against injustice. Emily walked into the workshop with a camera. "You're a hero, Jose. Want to be interviewed?" He blushed and waved her away. "I'm just a mechanic." She laughed. A mechanic who changed the neighborhood. Another month passed. Winter came to Albuquerque. Rare snow fell to the ground, covering the houses with a thin white layer. Jose was walking home from work when he saw Luis in the yard. The boy was riding a blue wheelchair, leaving tracks in the snow. Children were running nearby, laughing and throwing snowballs. Luis noticed Jose and waved. "Uncle Jose, look how fast I can go," he shouted, spinning around. Jose smiled, feeling warmth spread through his chest. He glanced at the red wheelchair leaning against the fence. It was old but still bright, like a reminder. Tom Craig had disappeared from town. Rumor had it that he had sold his Cadillac and left, leaving behind debts and lawsuits. The officials he had bribed were awaiting their sentences. The neighborhood came back to life. People repaired fences, painted houses, and children played in the streets. Jose didn't save the world, but he gave hope back to those who had lost it. He sat down on the porch, lit a cigarette, and stared at the falling snow for a long time. The radio in his pocket quietly played a melody about the road and home. For the first time in a long time, he felt that his life was not just about repairing cars. He was part of something bigger. The moral victory was complete. Tom got what he deserved through legal means, without bloodshed or violence. Jose, Maria, Luis, and the entire neighborhood proved that good can be stronger than evil if you fight for it together. Jose stubbed out his cigarette in the snow and walked home. Somewhere nearby, Luis's laughter rang out in the cold air like a little bell of hope.